I married the love of my life. Then a mysterious woman turned our wedding into a nightmare, and then I had always imagined my wedding day would be filled with nothing but joy and excitement. Yet as I stood in the suite of the hotel overlooking downtown Rochester, I could feel my nerves tightening with each passing second. The October air outside was cool and crisp, with golden leaves swirling gently in the breeze, but inside that room, everything felt still and heavy, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. I stared at myself in the full-length mirror, hardly able to believe that the woman in the reflection, draped in a delicate lace gown that clung to her figure, was me. My best friend Jenna hovered close by, fussing over the veil that cascaded down my back, her hand steady despite the subtle tremor in mine. "You look like you just stepped out of a dream," Jenna whispered, her voice filled with warmth and reassurance as she met my eyes in the mirror. "Caleb is going to fall over the moment he sees you walking down that aisle." I smiled, though the nerves continued to churn in my stomach, because in that moment all I wanted was to see Caleb's face and feel his steadying presence. We had been together for 4 incredible years, and through every challenge, he had been my rock, the person who always made me feel safe no matter what chaos surrounded us. I tried to take a deep breath and remind myself that today wasn't about nerves or fears, it was about finally starting the next chapter of our lives together. The church we had chosen stood on the edge of the city, an old stone building with stained glass windows that seemed to glow whenever the sun hit them just right. My mother Diane, who had raised me on her own after my father left us when I was only a kid, stood quietly in the corner of the suite. She watched me with soft eyes that glistened slightly with unshed tears, as if she was remembering every step that had brought us both to this day. She had given everything she had to give me a good life, running a small flower shop that kept food on the table and hope in our hearts. I owed her more than I could ever put into words, and having her there to walk me down the aisle felt more meaningful than anything else. Jenna's voice broke through my thoughts as she handed me a small velvet box, inside of which were a pair of pearl earrings that once belonged to my grandmother. "Your mother said these should be yours today," she said with a smile that made my eyes sting. I took the earrings with hands that still shook, feeling the weight of generations in the simple, beautiful jewelry. I fastened them on, taking one more long look at myself, at the gown, at the veil, at the small, hopeful smile that tugged at my lips despite everything. Outside, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a soft amber glow across the city and the church spires in the distance. The hotel suite, which had felt so large when we first arrived that morning, now seemed impossibly small, the air thick with anticipation and emotion. I could hear the faint sounds of the city below, the hum of traffic, the laughter of people heading to dinner, the world carrying on as if today was just another day. But for me, it felt like the world had shifted, and I was standing on the edge of something that could change everything. Jenna touched my arm again, gentle and firm, and said, "It's time." My mother stepped forward and took my hand, her fingers warm and familiar, grounding me in the moment. We walked together through the hallway of the hotel, every step echoing with the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. The lobby was quiet except for the soft rustle of my dress and the steady click of Jenna's heels behind us. Outside, the car waited to take us to the church, where friends and family were already gathering, where Caleb would be standing at the altar, where everything we had dreamed about would finally begin. As the car pulled up to the old church, I felt my throat tighten with emotion. The building rose before us, its stone walls bathed in the warm light of the setting sun, the stained glass glowing like embers. Guests were already inside, their voices a soft murmur that floated through the open doors. I stepped out of the car, my gown brushing the stone path beneath my feet, and clutched my mother's arm a little tighter. The chill of the evening air hit my face, but it felt refreshing, like a reminder to stay present, to savor every second of this day. We paused at the entrance of the church, just for a moment, as if to take it all in before stepping inside. I could hear the music starting, the first notes of the organ filling the air with rich, deep sound that seemed to settle over everything like a blessing. My mother leaned in and kissed my temple, whispering, "You're ready for this. I'm so proud of you." And I believed her. I had waited for this day for what felt like forever, and no matter how my heart raced or my hands shook, I knew that I was ready. I took one last deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped through the doors, into the light of the church, into the promise of the future I had dreamed of. The moment I stepped into the church, Time seemed to slow around me, and every sound became sharper, clearer, as though the world wanted me to remember every detail. The sunlight that streamed through the stained glass windows painted the aisle in shimmering colors, casting patterns of ruby and sapphire across the stone floor. The rich tones of the organ filled the space, each note vibrating in my chest, guiding me forward as if the music itself wanted to steady my shaking heart. My mother's arm was solid beneath my hand, her presence a silent reminder that I wasn't facing this moment alone, no matter how overwhelming it felt. As we began the long walk toward the altar, my eyes searched for Caleb, eager to find his face among the crowd. Every guest we passed seemed to blur together, friends, relatives, familiar smiles, all of them watching with warmth and excitement, their attention focused entirely on me and this journey down the aisle. But when I finally found Caleb standing at the altar, everything inside me seemed to stop. He looked so handsome in his charcoal suit, his dark hair neatly styled, but something about his expression sent a chill through me that no autumn breeze could have matched. His face was pale, his jaw tight, and his brown eyes, usually so kind and steady, were clouded with something I couldn't quite understand. I tried to meet his gaze, silently offering him a smile that I hoped would calm whatever storm was brewing in his mind, but he didn't smile back. His eyes flickered briefly to mine, then away, as if he couldn't bear to look at me for too long. The closer I got, the more I noticed the small details that made my heart sink further. How his hands trembled slightly at his sides, how a sheen of sweat glistened at his temple despite the coolness of the church, how his shoulders were rigid beneath his suit, as though he were bracing for impact. My mind raced with questions, but I forced myself to stay focused, to keep walking forward, because this was our day and I wanted so desperately for it to be perfect. When we finally reached the altar, my mother gently placed my hand in Caleb's, her fingers lingering for just a second longer than necessary, as if she too sensed that something was amiss. Caleb's hand was cold to the touch, and I felt it tremble against mine. I squeezed it softly, hoping to offer him some comfort, but he didn't return the gesture, his fingers remaining stiff and unresponsive. I whispered, so only he could hear, "It's okay. We're okay. Just breathe." But he didn't answer. His lips parted as though he wanted to speak, but no words came out, and the look in his eyes was one of pure anguish, like he was silently pleading for help from a storm no one else could see. The ceremony began, Father Lewis speaking in his calm, steady voice, welcoming everyone and talking about the beauty of love and commitment. His words echoed off the stone walls, filling the space with warmth, but I could hardly focus on them. My entire being was consumed by the growing fear that something was deeply, terribly wrong. Caleb kept glancing past me, his eyes darting toward the back of the church as though he expected someone, or something, to appear at any moment. I tried to follow his gaze once, but forced myself to turn my attention back to the priest, unwilling to let anything ruin this moment we had waited so long for. When it was time for the vows, Father Lewis turned to Caleb, his voice gentle but clear, and asked, "Caleb, do you take Brooke to be your wife, to love and cherish her for all the days of your life?" The church seemed to hold its breath, every guest waiting for his response, every sound outside the stone walls falling away until only the silence remained. Caleb opened his mouth as though to answer, but no sound emerged. His throat worked, his lips moved, but the words refused to come. Seconds passed, though they felt like an eternity, and I could hear the murmur of the guests starting, soft at first, then growing louder as people shifted in their seats, exchanging glances of confusion and concern. I felt my heart sink, felt the heat rise to my cheeks as my mind screamed for him to say something, anything, to break the terrible silence that had wrapped itself around us. I leaned in closer, my voice barely more than a whisper, trembling with confusion and fear. "Caleb, please. What's wrong?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, his eyes filled with such sorrow that it stole the breath from my lungs. But still he said nothing. I could see the tears welling at the corners of his eyes, could see the way his hands clenched at his sides as though he was fighting some invisible force, but whatever battle he was waging, he wasn't winning. Father Lewis, sensing the tension filling the room, tried again, this time simplifying the question. as if somehow that would help Caleb find his voice. Caleb, do you vow to love Brooke for the rest of your life? Please, just answer yes or no. Caleb didn't speak, but after a long, agonizing pause, he gave the smallest nod, enough for the priest to accept, but not enough to ease the pounding in my chest. My own vow felt hollow when I finally spoke it, the words tumbling from my lips as if on autopilot, my mind too clouded with worry to feel the weight of them. The ring exchange passed in a blur. His hand shook so badly that it took him longer than it should have to slide the band onto my finger, and when I placed his ring on his finger, I wanted nothing more than for him to finally say something, to explain, to tell me that this wasn't some nightmare I would wake from. The kiss we shared at the end of the ceremony was gentle, but there was no joy in it. His eyes glistened with unshed tears, and when the guests applauded, their claps felt hesitant, their smiles tight and uncertain, as if they too sensed the unease that had crept into what should have been the happiest day of our lives. As we turned to face our family and friends, I felt 1,000 questions swirling inside me, none of them with answers I could bear to hear. By the time we reached the reception hall, I was trying my best to hold myself together, but inside, I felt like I was coming apart at the seams. The ballroom on the top floor of the hotel was stunning, with crystal chandeliers that sparkled like stars and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city lights beginning to flicker on below. The tables were draped in crisp white linens, adorned with soft pink roses and flickering candles that cast a warm, golden glow across the room. From the outside, it probably looked like the perfect wedding celebration, but beneath the surface, I could feel the tension stretching tighter with every passing minute. Guests mingled and chatted, glasses of champagne clinking together in casual toasts, laughter and music filling the air like nothing was wrong. But I couldn't enjoy any of it, because every time I glanced at Caleb, I was reminded that nothing about this day felt right. He sat beside me at the head table, smiling and nodding politely when guests came to offer congratulations, but never once did he turn to me. Never once did he whisper the words I so desperately needed to hear. I kept waiting for him to lean over, to explain, to say anything at all, but he remained silent, his face tight with worry, his eyes darting toward the crowd as if searching for something or someone among the sea of faces. I tried to tell myself that maybe he was just overwhelmed, that maybe the weight of the day had simply gotten to him. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. There was something he wasn't telling me, something that had stolen the joy from his eyes and left him looking like a man trapped in a nightmare. My heart sank further each time I saw him chatting with his colleagues, his voice low but steady, his smile faint but genuine. He could speak to them, could make small talk and laugh softly at their jokes, but when it came to me, he said nothing. That silent distance between us felt more painful than anything I'd ever experienced. I tried once, during a quiet moment between the toast and the meal, to reach for his hand beneath the table, to squeeze it gently and ask in a whisper, "Caleb, please tell me what's wrong. Why won't you talk to me?" He turned to look at me then, and the anguish in his eyes nearly broke me, but still, he didn't answer. He squeezed my hand back, his grip tight and trembling, as if that was the only way he could beg for my understanding. But how could I understand what I didn't know? How could I ease his pain when he wouldn't let me in? It was then that a woman I hadn't noticed before approached our table, dressed in a simple black uniform, her name tag reading Maya. Her dark eyes flickered nervously between Caleb and me, and when she leaned in, her voice was so low I almost didn't catch her words. "Ma'am," she said, her hand slipping something folded into mine, "please read this when you can. It's important." Before I could ask her anything, she straightened and moved off, disappearing into the crowd as quickly as she had appeared. My heart pounded as I stared down at the slip of paper now hidden beneath the napkin in my lap. I hesitated for a moment, glancing around to make sure no one was watching, before unfolding it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, but what it said made my blood run cold. He's being blackmailed. The woman in the green dress at table 5 is threatening him. If he speaks to you, she'll expose a secret from his past. I overheard everything. Please be careful. I read it twice, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes, my mind reeling from the shock. I lifted my gaze and scanned the room until my eyes landed on the woman the note described. She was striking, with dark hair and sharp features, dressed in an emerald green gown that clung to her like a second skin. She was watching me, I realized with a jolt, her gaze cold and calculating, a faint smile playing at her lips as if she knew the storm she had unleashed. I felt the room spin slightly, felt my stomach twist with a sinking feeling that I had stepped into a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I tried to focus on the rest of the evening, tried to smile when people came to speak to us, tried to hold it together as speeches were made and glasses raised in our honor. But the weight of the note, the presence of that woman, Caleb's silence, it was all too much. When Caleb excused himself to go to the restroom, his voice steady and clear for the first time all night, I felt my heart break a little more. He could speak when it wasn't to me. He could speak when it meant keeping the illusion intact. The moment he was out of sight, I stood as well, clutching the note tightly in my hand, and made my way toward the woman in green. I don't know where I found the courage, but I couldn't let this go on. Couldn't let her ruin what should have been the happiest day of my life without at least trying to confront the truth. When I reached her table, she looked up at me with that same cool, mocking smile, and I forced my voice to stay low and steady as I asked, "Are you the one blackmailing my husband? Are you the reason he won't speak to me?" For a split second, something flickered in her eyes, surprise, maybe, or satisfaction, but then she tilted her head slightly, as if amused. "I think you're mistaken," she said softly, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "But if you want to discuss such things, perhaps we should find somewhere more private." Without waiting for my response, she rose gracefully from her chair and gestured toward the terrace doors, her movements fluid and confident, as though she controlled the entire room. I followed her, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it, my hands clenched into fists at my sides as I prepared myself for whatever truth was about to come crashing down around me. The city lights stretched out beyond the terrace, a sea of gold and silver beneath the night sky, but I barely saw any of it. All I could see was the woman who stood before me, the one who had stolen my joy, the one who held my husband's voice hostage. The cold night air hit me the moment I stepped onto the terrace, but the chill did nothing to clear the storm that raged in my mind. The city stretched out before us, glittering beneath the dark sky, but all I could focus on was the woman who turned to face me with that same smug, confident smile. She stood at the edge of the terrace, her hands resting lightly on the railing, as though she had all the time in the world, as though she wasn't the cause of my confusion, heartbreak, and anger. I forced myself to take a deep breath, my fingers tightening around the note that Maya had given me, the paper now creased and damp from the sweat of my trembling hands. I stepped closer, keeping my voice low but firm, determined not to let her control the conversation or the situation. "I don't care what your reasons are, and I don't care what you think you're gaining from this," I said, the words tumbling out faster than I intended. "You're going to tell me exactly what's going on, and you're going to do it now, because I'm done playing along with whatever twisted game you're trying to play." She tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes gleaming in the dim light, and for the first time, I saw the cruelty that hid behind her polished smile. There was no warmth in her gaze, no regret, only satisfaction at the pain she was causing. "Fine," she said at last, her voice calm and measured, as if she were discussing the weather rather than the destruction of my wedding day. "If you really want the truth, I'll give it to you. Caleb and I were involved, and it wasn't as long ago as he probably wants you to believe. He promised me things, led me to believe we had a future, and then he threw me aside like I was nothing. So today, I decided to remind him that I'm not someone who can be discarded without consequence." My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might shatter my ribs, but I kept my expression as steady as I could, unwilling to let her see just how much her words were tearing me apart. "And the blackmail?" I asked, though the question felt pointless, the answer already clear in the sinking feeling that had taken root in my gut. "The threats? The silence you forced on him?" She shrugged, as though it were the most natural thing in the world, as though blackmailing a man on his wedding day was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "He made his choice," she said, her voice low and sharp, "and now he gets to live with it. I told him that if he spoke to you, if he so much as whispered a word, I'd send the photos to everyone. Your friends, your family, his colleagues, the entire guest list. I was going to ruin him, the way he ruined me." I felt the blood drain from my face as I listened to her, felt the weight of her hatred pressing down on me like a stone. But even as the panic threatened to take over, something else stirred beneath it, something fiercer, stronger, the part of me that refused to let this woman dictate the course of my life. I slipped my phone from my bag, my fingers steady now, my heart hardening as I tapped the record button and slid it back into place without breaking eye contact. "You can't do this," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Whatever happened between you and Caleb, whatever lies you're telling yourself to justify this, it doesn't give you the right to destroy other people." She laughed then, a cold, bitter sound that echoed across the terrace, and for a moment, I thought she might actually be unhinged. "I have every right," she hissed, stepping closer, her face inches from mine. "You think you're special? You think you're the first woman to steal something that wasn't yours? I'm making sure you remember this day for the rest of your life. Not as the happiest day you imagined, but as the day you realize the man you married isn't the man you thought he was." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the door to the terrace opened and Maya appeared, her expression tense but resolute. "I heard enough," Maya said, her voice steady, her hands clenched at her sides. "I heard everything this morning, and I've heard enough now. You're done, Vanessa." For the first time that night, I saw fear flicker across Vanessa's face, her composure cracking just slightly as she took a step back, her gaze darting between us as though calculating her next move. "You're both making a mistake," she said, but the confidence had drained from her voice, leaving behind only bitterness and desperation. "No one will believe you. No one ever believes the woman who's been wronged. Security will believe us," Maya shot back, already pulling out her phone. "And so will the police when they hear the recording. You're finished." Vanessa's mask slipped entirely then, her face twisting with rage as she realized she had lost, that whatever victory she thought she'd claimed had been snatched away in an instant. I could hear Maya on the phone with the hotel staff, her words calm and clear as she explained the situation, as she requested immediate assistance. Vanessa turned on me one last time, her voice low and venomous. "This isn't over," she said, and then she tried to push past us, but it was too late. Security was already arriving, their voices firm as they guided her inside to wait for the authorities. I stood frozen for a moment, the adrenaline rushing through my veins, making it hard to catch my breath, making it hard to believe that any of this had truly happened. When I finally turned to Maya, I didn't have the words to thank her, didn't have the strength to do anything but grasp her hand in mine and squeeze it tight. "You saved us," I managed at last, my voice breaking as the weight of the night crashed over me all at once. "You didn't have to, but you did." She shook her head, her expression softening as she looked at me. "I knew what it felt like to be powerless," she said quietly, "and I couldn't stand by and let her do it to you." Together, we returned inside, the noise of the reception washing over us like a tide as we stepped back into the light and sound. Caleb was waiting near the head table, his eyes wide with worry, his hands shaking as he rushed to meet me. And for the first time that night, I saw him as he truly was. Not as a man trapped by guilt and fear, but as someone who had been fighting a losing battle and had finally been given a chance to breathe again. "It's over," I whispered, my voice raw with emotion as I wrapped my arms around him. "You can speak now. You're safe." And as his arms closed around me, as he finally let the tears fall, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. In the hours that followed, everything felt like a blur of relief and exhaustion, as though my body and mind couldn't quite keep up with the storm that had finally passed. Caleb and I stayed close, barely letting go of each other's hands, as if afraid that if we did, we'd lose the fragile sense of peace we had just begun to reclaim. Guests, unaware of the full truth, watched us with smiles that were warmer and more genuine now, perhaps sensing that something had lifted between us even if they didn't understand what had weighed us down. Maya stayed nearby, quietly watching over everything, and I made sure to introduce her to my mother and Caleb's parents, wanting them to know who had helped pull us back from the edge. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and the last of the decorations were being cleared away, Caleb and I sat together in our hotel room, the city lights twinkling outside the window like distant stars. The weight of the day had settled heavily on both of us, but for the first time since morning, he began to speak freely, telling me everything I had needed to hear. His voice trembled at first, but the more he spoke, the steadier he became, as if confessing the truth was the only way to set himself free. He told me about the night 18 months ago when, overwhelmed by stress and loneliness during a particularly brutal work project, he had made a mistake he regretted almost immediately. He ended things with Vanessa the next day, realizing that what he wanted, what he needed, had always been me. As I listened, part of me ached with betrayal, a deep and bitter hurt that no amount of love could fully erase in an instant. But another part of me, the part that had stood beside him at the altar and clung to hope when everything felt lost, understood the torment he had carried, the guilt that had nearly broken him. I told him that I would need time, that forgiveness wasn't something I could offer overnight, but that I believed we could rebuild, that I wanted to try. He nodded, tears filling his eyes again, and promised that he would spend the rest of his life proving himself to me, showing me that the man I fell in love with was still there, waiting beneath the scars of this awful day. We thought, in those quiet moments, that the worst was behind us, that we could finally begin healing and move forward. But as it turned out, the nightmare wasn't quite finished. Just when we started planning a small, intimate ceremony for close family and friends, wanting to exchange our vows again without the shadow of blackmail hanging over us, something happened that none of us saw coming. 2 weeks before the new date we had chosen, we received a call in the middle of the night that made my blood run cold. Vanessa, it seemed, had managed to escape custody during a transfer between facilities, slipping through the cracks of the system with terrifying ease. The authorities assured us that they were searching for her, that she wouldn't get far, but the damage was already done. The fear I thought I had finally shaken came roaring back, stronger and darker than before. The weeks leading up to our second ceremony were filled with tension so thick I could hardly breathe. Every time the phone rang or a knock came at the door, my heart leapt into my throat, terrified that it would be her. Caleb tried to stay strong for me, tried to reassure me that everything would be okay, but I could see the strain wearing on him too. Could see the way he kept glancing over his shoulder whenever we went out, the way he double-checked every lock before we went to bed. We wanted so badly to believe we could still have our day, still share our vows without fear. But as the new date approached, that hope began to feel like a fragile, flickering light in the darkness. On the morning of the ceremony, I woke feeling uneasy, a tight knot of dread sitting heavy in my chest. The small chapel we had chosen was simple but beautiful, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, surrounded by towering oaks whose leaves had turned brilliant shades of red and gold. Our closest friends and family gathered inside, their faces filled with hope and love, all of them wanting to see us finally find the peace we deserved. I walked down the aisle with my mother once more, my heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with excitement this time. Caleb stood waiting for me, his expression filled with tenderness and determination, as if willing the world to give us this one perfect moment. But just as Father Martin began to speak, just as we prepared to share our vows, a low murmur rippled through the small crowd. A man in plain clothes, one of the security team we had quietly hired to watch over the day, stepped forward and whispered something to Father Martin. The priest's face went pale, and he cleared his throat, glancing at us with a mix of sorrow and urgency. "I'm so sorry, but we must evacuate the building immediately," he said, his voice tight with worry. "There's been a threat reported, and we cannot take any chances." The words hit like a slap, the air rushing from my lungs as the room erupted into confused whispers and worried glances. Caleb took my hand at once, his grip firm and protective, and together we followed the others outside, the weight of what was happening crashing down on us. Outside, beneath the canopy of autumn leaves, we stood in stunned silence, watching as the police and bomb squad arrived, their faces grim and focused as they moved swiftly into action. I could hardly believe what was happening, could hardly believe that once again, our day had been stolen from us by fear and cruelty. I wanted to cry, wanted to scream, but instead, I stood frozen, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. Was this Vanessa's doing? Had she somehow managed to slip past the net again, to find a way to tear us apart, even from the shadows? Caleb turned to me, his eyes filled with sorrow, but also with something stronger, something that gave me strength when I had none left of my own. "We will get through this," he said, his voice steady despite everything. "No matter what she tries, no matter what happens, I won't let anything come between us again." I nodded, tears streaming down my face, and clung to him as if he were the only solid thing left in a world that had turned upside down. We watched together as the chapel was searched, as the threat was investigated, as the day slipped away from us once more. That night, as we sat together in the small apartment we had come to think of as our safe place, we held each other close and made a promise that no ceremony could ever match. We would not let fear define us, would not let the cruelty of one person steal our future. Vanessa might have escaped for now, might still haunt the edges of our lives like a ghost, but she would not win. We didn't know what the days ahead would bring, didn't know how or when the final confrontation would come, but we knew one thing with absolute certainty. We would face it together, stronger than we had ever been, ready for whatever came next.